As soon as Mary laid eyes on the old Victorian mansion on Airbnb, she knew she had to book it for her and her husband's anniversary getaway. The listing boasted of a beautifully restored house with old-world charm, perfect for a romantic weekend away from the city. But as soon as they arrived, Mary and her husband knew something was off. There was a strange smell in the air, and the decor was outdated, almost as if they had traveled back in time. Mary tried to convince herself that it was just the old house settling, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. As they settled in, the strange occurrences increased. They heard footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing on their own, and the creaking floorboards echoed through the house. Mary tried to brush it off, but the fear in her voice gave her away. On the second night, they woke up to the sound of a little girl's laughter. They searched the entire house, but there was no one there. That's when they saw her. A little girl in a white dress, standing at the end of the hallway. Her hair was matted and dirty, and her eyes were black and soulless. She looked at them and whispered, "Get out." Mary and her husband were paralyzed with fear. They couldn't move. They couldn't speak. They were trapped in a nightmare, with no escape in sight. The little girl's gaze held them captive, and they could feel her evil energy seeping into their souls. Suddenly, Mary snapped out of her trance and grabbed her husband's hand. They ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped, with the little girl blocking their only exit. Mary could feel her husband's grip loosen as he was being pulled towards the ghostly figure. She screamed and begged for the little girl to release him, but it was too late. Mary was left alone, trapped in the mansion with the ghost of the little girl. She searched for a way out, but every door and window was sealed shut. She was trapped with the malevolent spirit closing in on her. As Mary stood alone in the mansion, her mind raced with thoughts of her husband's disappearance. She knew the little girl was responsible, but she couldn't understand why. She tried to reason with the ghostly figure, pleading for her husband's safe return, but the little girl only laughed in response. Days turned into weeks, and Mary was left alone to face the horrors of the mansion. Every night, she heard the little girl's laughter and footsteps echoing through the halls. Every morning, she woke up to find more objects moved and misplaced, as if someone had been watching her every move. Mary began to lose hope of ever escaping the mansion. She tried to keep herself busy by exploring every nook and cranny of the house, hoping to find a way out. But every door and window was sealed shut, and every attempt to break them down was met with failure. As time went on, Mary began to feel as if the mansion was alive, and the little girl was its puppet master. The walls seemed to breathe, and the floors would creak and moan as if they were alive. Mary began to feel as if she was being watched constantly, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. One night, Mary awoke to find the little girl standing at the foot of her bed. Her hair was tangled and matted, and her eyes were black and soulless. Mary tried to scream, but the little girl put her finger to her lips and whispered, "Shh, don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. You're mine now." Mary was paralyzed with fear as the little girl crawled onto her bed and began to stroke her hair. The little girl's touch was cold, and Mary could feel her evil energy seeping into her body. She tried to fight back, but she was powerless against the little girl's grasp. Days turned into months, and Mary became a shell of her former self. Her hair was unkempt, and her eyes were sunken and lifeless. She had given up all hope of ever escaping the mansion and had resigned herself to her fate. One day, Mary heard a knock at the door. She tried to call out for help, but her voice was too weak. The knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. Mary dragged herself out of bed and made her way to the front door, hoping against hope that it was someone there to rescue her. Miraculously, the door opened. She was greeted by a group of ghost hunters. They had been investigating the mansion after reports of strange occurrences and had stumbled upon Mary by accident. They were shocked at her appearance and quickly took her away to safety. As Mary left the mansion for the final time, she couldn't help but feel as if the little girl was watching her from the shadows. She knew that the mansion would always be haunted, and that the little girl's spirit would never rest until she claimed another victim. Mary never fully recovered from her ordeal and spent the rest of her life haunted by the memories of the mansion. She warned others never to stay there, but some say that the mansion still stands, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim to fall into its trap. Story 2. The Unseen Stalker. Jake and his friends were looking for a weekend of debauchery and partying, so they decided to book an Airbnb in the middle of the woods. The cabin was isolated, with no cell phone signal or neighbors for miles, but they didn't care. They were excited to be far away from civilization and free to do whatever they wanted. As soon as they arrived, they felt a sense of unease. The cabin was old and creaky, with a musty smell that permeated every corner, but they shrugged it off, too busy cracking open beers and planning their weekend festivities. As night fell, things started to get strange. Doors opened on their own, and footsteps could be heard coming from the attic. The group tried to ignore it, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every time they turned around, they caught glimpses of a shadowy figure lurking in the corners. But when they looked directly at it, it disappeared. Startled with fear, the group tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. They were trapped with no way out. Panic set in as they tried everything to escape the cabin. They were running out of food and water, and their only source of light was a few candles. It wasn't until they found an old journal in the cabin that they realized what they were dealing with. The journal belonged to a man who had stayed in the cabin years ago. He had gone insane, convinced that a supernatural entity was watching him and trying to claim him. The journal contained drawings of the entity, and as Jake and his friends looked at the drawings, they realized that they had been seeing the same thing. As they read further, they discovered that the entity required sacrifices to maintain its power. It demanded a human life every year, and the previous tenant had been its latest victim. Jake and his friends realized that they were next. Desperate for a way out, they found an old trapdoor in the floor leading to a cellar. They climbed down and discovered an altar with candles and strange symbols. They knew that this was the source of the evil that was haunting them. Jake and his friends made the decision to light the altar on fire, hoping to destroy the entity once and for all. But as the flames grew higher, they heard the entity's screams of pain. The candles flickered and went out, and then everything was silent. The group climbed out of the cellar and ran to their car, not looking back. As they drove away, they thought they had escaped their nightmare, but they were wrong. The entity had not been destroyed, but instead awaited them a few miles down the road, where it devoured the bodies and souls of Jake and his friends. The next day, the police found the burnt-out cabin, with no sign of the group, but as they searched the woods, they heard strange whispers in the wind. The entity had claimed new victims, and it would continue to do so until it was satisfied. Jake and his friends had unwittingly stumbled upon a horror that had been hidden in the woods for centuries. The entity was ancient and powerful, and it would not be stopped by mere mortals. Their souls would forever be trapped in an endless cycle of sacrifice and suffering. As the police left the woods, the entity watched them with glowing eyes. It knew that there would be more victims, more souls to add to its collection. And it smiled, knowing that it would never be satiated. Story 3. The Time Loop. Laura and her boyfriend were looking forward to their weekend getaway in a remote Airbnb, away from the chaos of city life. As they arrived and settled into their room, strange things began to happen. The clock on the wall ticked backward, and flashes of light illuminated the room out of nowhere. Initially, Laura and her boyfriend brushed it off as their imagination, but the occurrences kept increasing as the night progressed. The hallway was filled with inexplicable noises, and the room began to fill with a cold and eerie mist. Laura and her boyfriend were petrified and decided to leave, but the door was locked from the outside. As they searched the room for any possible way out, they came across an old trunk at the foot of their bed. As they opened it, they realized that something terrifying was happening. The trunk was filled with old newspaper clippings and pictures of a young woman who looked exactly like Laura. The headlines talked about a mysterious disappearance, and the pictures showed the same doppelganger that was now haunting them. It dawned on them that they were trapped in a time loop, reliving the events that led to the woman's disappearance. The doppelganger was the ghost of the missing woman. They couldn't begin to imagine the danger they were in. The couple tried their best to break the cycle, but to no avail. They were caught up in a never-ending loop of events, each time leading to the same terrifying end. They were trapped in the remote location forever, unable to escape the horrors of the past. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the room underwent a complete transformation. The wallpaper peeled, the furniture rotted away, and the newspaper clippings turned to dust. But the doppelganger remained, a constant reminder of the tragic fate that awaited them. Laura and her boyfriend were doomed to spend eternity trapped in the haunted house, reliving the same events over and over again. They were now just another chapter in the dark history of the cursed place. As time went on, the doppelganger's appearance became more distorted and grotesque. The lines between the past and present blurred. They were no longer sure what was real and what was a manifestation of their worst fears. One day, they decided to confront the ghost of the missing woman. They found her standing in the corner of the room, staring at them with empty eyes. The couple begged for mercy, but the doppelganger remained unmoved. Suddenly, the room was filled with a deafening silence, and everything went dark. Laura and her boyfriend were paralyzed with fear as the doppelganger advanced toward them. They tried to run, but it was no use. The ghostly apparition was too powerful. As the doppelganger closed in on them, Laura and her boyfriend were engulfed in a blinding light. They screamed in agony as their bodies were ripped apart, their souls condemned to spend eternity in the haunted house. The house remained empty for years, but locals reported seeing strange lights and hearing blood-curdling screams coming from the abandoned property. Some even claimed to have seen the ghostly apparition of Laura and her boyfriend, trapped forever in a never-ending cycle of horror.